Okay, yeah, so thanks for the introduction, Craig. Thank you all for having me. I've been with AET almost 4 years now, but I am out of grad school for 8 years. I worked in California for a little bit, Austin, Texas for a little bit, and then came up here. For the agenda today, I'm going to go over forming the committee, how I wrote up dams, originally had signed on for levees, the 2018 release of the Minnesota report card, and then the outreach that we had at the organizational level and legislative level. Go through a few of the lessons learned, and then talk about the 2022 upcoming report card, and then just some notes on how to get involved. So we started, let's see, I got the email saying, hey, Minnesota would like to come out with a report card, which they hadn't done before. And, please let us know if you'd like to get involved. So ASCE, they recommend that the report card be done on a 4-year cycle, because that kind of gives the data time to change. It gives things time to update based on different funding mechanisms. So at the end of 2016, there was a big election that year, and I realized that I was very naive to the political process. Like, I did not know much besides voting, which, whatever, you have to start somewhere, right? So I felt like the report card was a way that I could use my engineering background to provide information to advocate for public policy. So it wasn't necessarily getting involved with politics. It was trying to be a local resource for city all the way up to federal legislation should they need it. So we started the committee, and there were at any time 20 to 30 of us. So we started in fall of 2016 and released it in October of 2018. So it was a 2-year process, and it was okay, literally, how do we do this? Like, we need to form connections with state agencies. Some of us don't even know which state agencies to start with. So we went around the room, and it was, okay, ASCE has 16 categories that they cover for infrastructure. At the time, there were 16. All right, aviation's first up. Anyone have experience with the aviation community? And that's kind of how we broke it out. We ended up with 9 categories. Well, 10 actually. So I was one of the few geotechs in the room. And so we got to dams, and they were like, all right, who are the geotechs? And, I did not have a ton of experience with dams past what I learned in undergrad and graduate school. So, but I was like, well, okay, it's looking at data, it's writing a report. Sure, why not? Everyone was kind of starting from square one together. So it was a really comfortable and supportive space. So, we also said, oh, well, dams and levees are similar. Why not do both of them? And it was like, yeah, okay, sure. And eventually it got to a point where, it was too much, right? It's a volunteer effort from everyone on the committee. And I was like, all right, let's just do dams. And I think there may have been a couple other examples like that, but that one is mine to share with you all. So yeah, we started gathering data. We had monthly meetings to check in where, we not only updated about our progress, but it was like, hey, I'm running into this issue of, needing access to data. Even though it's publicly available data, you still have to know who to ask for some of it, which is, I don't know, a lesson learned. So the group that we had was, retired engineers, government engineers from, like, city, county level, DNR, MnDOT. We had engineers in the private side, EITs, professional engineers. It was a really cool group. And at that point in my career, it was the largest team I'd been a part of and the most diverse. So it was a really good experience. And we even had someone that had actual like lobbying experience. So getting to hear that perspective and understanding that, you know, government officials, when they're trying to sell legislation, and I know I'm using the word sell, but it's, you know, it's like we want to know a story. Like, why do we care about this, right? And they should care because their constituents care. Like, okay, well then give us an example of why our constituents care. And so, you know, it's examples of lead being found in water, of, you know, not being able to get to your job on time. You know, name the infrastructure category, and you can come up with an example and present the story. So, okay. All right, so here are the grades that we found in 2018. Overall, the grade for the state was a C, and you can see that aviation had the highest grade, a B, and then the lowest grade was roads at a D+. So I'm going to explain what the grades are. A is exceptional, fit for the future. B is good, adequate for now. But some elements show signs of general deterioration. C is mediocre and requires attention. D is poor, at risk, with many elements approaching the end of their service life. F is failing or critical, unfit for purpose. So Minnesota came in at that mediocre level, which, like, not terrible, not great, right? It's mediocre. So when we present this, and at ASCE advocates for a grade of B, because anything higher than that does not feel like an appropriate use of funds given the serious amount of backlog there is in funding America's and Minnesota's infrastructure. And this report card is created to be an advocacy tool. It is to help engineers like us have that conversation with legislators. It's, to give the legislators a pamphlet and hold up and say, look, Minnesota has a C, and, you know, to provide those visuals as well so people remember. All right, so how do we come up with the grades? We look at 8 different criteria, which are capacity, condition, funding, future need, operation and maintenance, public safety, resilience, and innovation. And so I'm going to run through these in the context of dams. And, you know, dams, in my mind, when I first started looking at the data, didn't necessarily point to much innovation, right? You know, dams were largely built in the first half of the 20th century, and methods, materials have all improved since then. But as I started running across news stories and seeing where some funding was available, you know, I saw that, okay, well, there is innovation in how we're trying to restore these, I don't know, like ecosystems, the small pockets, right? Where the dam may not be serving its function anymore and poses more of a risk if it were to fail. Is there a way that we can get rid of it while still maintaining some of the benefits like flood control? So let me get into my write-up about dams. All right, so yeah, I was going to take on dams and levees, and which they're actually, so the Army Corps does have a levee database, which is readily accessible and readily understandable. So in my mind, I was like, well, the data's there. It should be easy enough to take on. But it was a lot to get started on this the first time around. So yeah, Minnesota's dams got a C, right in line with the rest of the state. Mediocre, requires attention. So, you know, I pulled data from the Army Corps, the DNR, and then, you know, trying to find local news stories, trying to see if there were any like hot ticket items where dams had been discussed. And in gathering that data, you then have to assign a number to the data. So it's like you're using qualitative information, sometimes quantitative, and then assigning a value to it, right? To get to your A, B, C, D grade. So that was, you know, kind of weird, right? Having to break that down, but that's where the committee really helped out in providing that gut check of, okay, yeah, I can see why you assigned that way. That makes sense. And then I also, once I had done my assessment, I reached back out to the DNR just to make sure, you know, I wasn't going to blindside them. I mean, you know, if I gave them a B, it would have been like, well, we need funding. Like the dams did not get any funds in the 2016 bonding bill. There was no money appropriated to them at the state level. So, you know, I feel like if I said B, they would have been like, no, thank you. Just to make sure, again, that they can use this report card as an advocacy tool. So I have here some bullet points that were the recommendations to raise the grade for dams. So Minnesota's dams are classified based on probable losses if they were to fail. 199 of Minnesota's dams would cause probable loss to human life and or property damage if they were to fail. So this graphic on the right shows dots representing most of Minnesota's dams. Black is low hazard, yellow is significant, and red is high. So the majority of Minnesota's dams serve the primary purpose of flood control, which, as you can imagine, flood control has property and personal implications, right? So looking at red, the high hazard dams, all of Minnesota's high hazard dams do not have EAPs. And so EAP is an emergency action plan. And even the ones that do have emergency action plans, you know, if there were to be a break or a breach in the dam, they're not necessarily readily available, right? I'm not trying to go on Google to look up an EAP when I know the dam is failing. I need to have already practiced what the plan is, you know, as a constituent, but also as first responders. You know, you have to have your plan. How are you going to get to the community on the other side of the river? How far off our normal track do we have to go? So, you know, that's one piece, right? Make sure people know what to do. But then let's also design and repair dams to meet current design standards. But these current design standards need to be updated to not only account for current trends, but for future trends. So I refer not only to climate factors, you know, 100-year floods are occurring much more often than every 100 years. So that data needs to be updated. Additionally, you know, a dam that may have been built as low hazard now has communities popping up, you know, residences and businesses downstream that if it were to fail, now it's getting on the verge of being a high hazard dam simply because of the population growing downstream of it. So it's multi-tiered, right? As is all infrastructure. And that leads us into then the piece of where, just general education and awareness of your infrastructure. When you turn the water on, where does it come from? You want a bus to get from A to B, you need to cross this bridge to get safely where you need to go. There's so many ways that infrastructure affects our life, which, I think if anything has just been hugely spotlighted in 2020 with the pandemic and, other social issues going on. So it's a very interesting time to be a part of this committee. So getting into that education piece, we then look at outreach. So the report card came out October 2018. We did a press release at the Capitol. There were reporters there. There were elected officials that spoke, ASCE representatives that spoke. And then the rest of us category leads were there too. And then over the next several months, and I mean, still, we're still referencing back to the report card for our talking points when we, not only present to professional organizations like this, but when we're communicating with elected officials. So one piece, you want to keep your section informed, right? We have support from the Duluth section, the Minnesota section, and then up to the national level. And then there's other tiers like communicating with student chapters, just to get the word out and to encourage people to reach out if you're interested in, advocating for infrastructure. Infrastructure it's a bipartisan topic, right? Where you get into partisan relationships is when you're talking about funding, which is where we try to stay out of. We elected you all. Here's the issue. Here's how your constituents are struggling. It's your job to figure out how to fix it. It's me paraphrasing, but So you engage with your elected officials. ASCE does provide like canned language. If you want to just quickly send something out to your legislator, you can also personalize it. Once you kind of dig into it, it's actually very easy to get in touch with legislators, especially when you have a brand like ASCE behind your name. So the ASCE report card is really well known at the federal level. I mean, I remember, in high school hearing about America's infrastructure and the grade of it. So it's cool to be a part of this now and to be helping to provide a tool that legislators not only know about but value. So, with that, we can then help to educate the public with all the resources that we have. All right, so lessons learned from the 2018 round. So I mentioned the public policy versus politics before. So, we're not getting into we support this candidate and not this candidate. It's more of we support, and this is guidance from ASCE National. It's we support this piece of legislation that that will update climate codes. That was one that recently passed through the House in DC and is with the Senate to update those codes to then update design codes. So it's getting involved with policy and legislation, but not politics. So in 2018, there were some state Congress officials that brought up like conflict of interest, and they said, aren't you just trying to line your pockets? Which is just, having your motives questioned is always offensive, right? So first off, ASCE has a code of ethics, which we're operating under. And as a professional engineer, you have a code of ethics that you're operating under. And then further, like, we all drink the same water. Our kids go to the same schools. We're all trying to use the same buses to get from A to B. Like, it just, I think it was deflecting what they were trying to do. But, you know, it's just interesting how that conversation can come up a lot, because infrastructure should be bipartisan, which kind of gets into this diversity, equity, and inclusion piece. You know, and unfortunately, infrastructure is not equitable, right? It's, you know, the world's not perfect. It's fine. Like, I'm not naive, but there's certain things that, you know, I think that funding could be appropriated more evenly. So we're hoping to bring that question of equity and infrastructure, or that discussion of equity and infrastructure, into the 2022 report card. There's a contact I'll be working with at Habitat for Humanity. And then one of our committee members works with Minnesota 2050, which works with, it's called like Equity Blueprint. I don't remember the name exactly, but we're going to be getting into that and discussing, you know, trying to see a fair lens of the data, and recognizing how that data and that advocacy can be used. Because, you know, there's socioeconomic differences. There's urban versus rural, which is really huge in Minnesota. You know, there's young communities versus traditionally older communities that are on fixed incomes. It's multi-tiered, and, you know, I'm an engineer. I'm not trained in human resources. It's a topic that's important to me. I am a minority in engineering, but I want to be able to further the conversation and to do it appropriately so that the conversation can continue. So, all right, that gets me into the 2022 report card. So building on what we did in 2018, we're doing all of those categories, and we're adding on 4 more. Stormwater, inland waterways. I really should know this by now. Public parks and schools, which public parks in Minnesota, I mean, those have gotten such a spotlight over the last year. So many people have not only been outside, they've relied on it for their mental health, but then, you know, also, okay, well, we need to stay 6 feet apart. We're on a trail. Like, let me have my space, you have your space. So it's been, you know, it's always an interesting time to talk about infrastructure, right? So right now we have about 30 members, and, you know, again, people coming and going based on different commitments, but it's a good group. One of the next topics that I think National is getting into is broadband, which National released the 2021 report card last week. I might have already said that, sorry. And one of the topics that they discussed was broadband. This wasn't graded, but there were certainly discussion points about it. And then, yeah, my last pitch is just for everyone to get involved. Reach out if you have questions. This report card at ascemn.org goes to me right now, but I'm happy to connect you with whoever you're looking for to answer the questions, my AET email. And then if you want to look around the infrastructure report card site, it's been a very rewarding experience, and the people that I've met make it even better. They challenge me. You know, I'm growing as an engineer, but also I'm growing as a professional engineer, but also as someone trying to advocate for my community, which is not an original piece that I thought would be part of my career. I mean, I chose civil engineering because I care about my community, but I didn't think I would be speaking to it, you know, for example, like I'm doing right now. So it's been a really positive experience. So with that, I can open the floor to any questions.
All right.